If you want to learn how to use Gemini's API in order to build your own AI apps, this is the video for you. We're going to be building this AI chatbot that will allow us to have multi-turn conversational chat, all thanks to Google's large language model. Meaning we'll be able to build on the question that was asked before by feeding in the whole history of the conversation for context. Pretty cool, right? But what even is Gemini? In the least amount of words, Gemini is a series of multimodal generative AI models developed by Google. Gemini models can accept text and image in prompts depending on what model variation you choose. What this means is that we can feed in text prompts such as what day of the week is it, and it will return back a day such as Wednesday. And not only that, we can feed in images as prompts too. So I can feed in a picture of a cat in a hat and we can ask what is in the photo and we should receive a text response back. If at the end you want to take your app to the next level and even start building in-app video or audio capabilities such as video conference calls that perhaps take the audio of what is being said and trigger the AI to answer questions when initialized, for example, you can do so with the Stream SDK and API. This API is super easy to use and you can get the code for it simply by following these 6 steps right here. Of course, this is for a React app as that is what we will be building today, but you can also get the code for React Native, Flutter, and so many more. Seam also integrates seamlessly with ChatGPT and Gemini. Make sure to click on the link in the video description below to get the code to do this and the 6 steps necessary. Okay, so what are we waiting for? Let's build out a simple multi-turn conversation chatbot using React for the front end and Node.js for the back end. Okay, so let's do it. I'm just going to go ahead and create a new project. So let's go ahead and select new project. And this is going to be a React app. So this will essentially spin up a React app for me thanks to the npx create react app command. So let's go ahead and call this something. I'm just going to call this Gemini app. Maybe let's stick React to the front. Okay, so this is essentially going to be stored in my WebStorm project directory on my computer. I'm just going to click create and wait for that to spin up the app along with all the pre-configured files that we need. So this is wonderful. This is going to save us a bunch of time. Let's just wait for that to do its thing. In the meantime, I'm just going to go to the Gemini documentation. So here we are. Here's the URL if you need it. And we're just going to work on getting our API key. So let's go ahead and build with Gemini. And let's click on this link right here, AI Google Dev, and it should take us to our dashboard. Of course, please do make sure that you are signed in. So I'm just going to go ahead and sign in here. And I'm just signing in with my Google account. So please go ahead and do the same. And now we are free to get our API key. So that is something we're going to do. As a reminder, I'm just going to go to the API docs here. What we're going to be doing is creating an app that uses the Gemini Pro model. And now we're going to just go to Node.js as we are going to be building in Node.js for this project. And we're going to build a multi-turn conversation chat. So if you click on here, here is build multi-turn conversation chat. We're going to use the Gemini Pro model for this to allow us to do so. And essentially, we're going to be taking this code from here. So if you get stuck, please refer to the documentation. For now, however, we also need to get our API key. So let's go ahead and do it. If you scroll down here and click on Get an API key, just click on here and it should get a key for you so that you can communicate with the API. However, make sure to keep this safe. You don't want someone stealing your key and racking up loads and loads on your credit card if you choose to attach a credit card to this eventually. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to head over to Google AI Studio, get API key in Google AI Studio. And you should be able to get the API key. Now, if you can't, it could be because it is not available in your region. So just keep that in mind. Great. Okay, let's go back to our app. So once this is done, you will see all the node modules that you need, as well as the source directory of all the files that have been added, as well as a package JSON, along with all the dependencies that we will be using so far. So these are the latest dependencies and the versions of them that we are using for this project. Please make sure to always keep the dependencies the same version, okay, just in case you're doing this in the future and something's changed and you want to still build this app, just revert back to these versions that you see here, as well as the versions that we will be installing. So first off, however, I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. So on the index.js file, I'm just going to delete the report web vitals from here, as we will not be doing that. We also won't be doing any testing, and I'm going to get rid of the semicolons just because that is my personal preference. So that is all that should be in the index.js file. Just save that. Like I said, I'm just going to delete these 3 files right here. So the logo, the report web vitals, and the setup tests. So just do the same, delete anyway. Now in the index CSS, we're going to start from scratch. So I'm going to delete everything from this file. The app test.js is also going to be deleted, as I don't want to do any tests. So no test for you today. Let's also get rid of the app CSS file, as this is a small app, so I'm just going to keep all the styling in the index CSS file. And now the app.js file, once again, I'm just going to essentially delete all of this from it. And let's delete all of that so we can start fresh. So that should be in here. I'm going to make this a functional expression as well, just because that is my preference. Okay, great. So all you should have in the source directory is this app.js file that looks like this, the index.css file that is empty, and the index.js file which should look like this. Wonderful. Let's move on. Now, let's go ahead and store our secret somewhere. So I'm going to create a new file. It's a .env file, and we're going to add our API key in here. So our Google Generative AI key. So let's go ahead and call this Google Gen AI key. You can call it whatever you wish. And I'm just going to paste in my unique key like so. Great. And that's it. So now we are ready to continue. We essentially can start building. I'm just going to build out a simple front end for this so we can get started with the meatier stuff soon. So let's go ahead and do it. Let's go ahead and create a simple chat. So in here, what I'm going to do is let's create a wrapping div. Let's give it the class name app. Let's also have a section in here. This is going to be the search section. So I'm going to give it the class name of, you guessed it, search section. Just going to minimize that for now. And I'm just going to have a paragraph element. What do you want to know? Okay, and then let's have a button that says surprise me, in case we want to be surprised with something. So surprise me, just like that. Let's maybe also give this a class name. I'm going to give the class name of surprise. And in fact, what I am going to do is actually put this in the paragraph element. You will see why. So in fact, maybe let's run this. I'm going to get out my terminal, and I'm just going to do npm run start. And in fact, because we're going to have a front end and a back end, I'm going to get that script. I'm just going to define it as the front end script. And we're also going to have a back end script. Okay, so back end, and this is going to be nodemon. So that's a package that we're going to have to install to listen out for constant changes on the server.js file, which we are yet to write. That's going to hold our whole back end. So maybe let's go ahead and create that file. New file. It's a JavaScript file. I'm going to call it server.js. Okay, cool. And let's continue. So before we forget, let's actually install that package. So maybe let's go ahead and do that now. npm I nodemon, and that will essentially install it. So it will just add to these dependencies right here. Nodemon has just been added along with its version. So okay, let's start our front end. I'm going to do npm run start front end. Again, making sure you're just in that app. And ta-da, it's spun up our front end along with the elements that we've essentially added. I'm just gonna inspect this so we can work with it a little bit better. Great, this is looking good. Let's move on. So let's just minimize that for now and let's continue adding elements. So we've got that P element. Next, I'm gonna have a div, and this is actually gonna be a container. So I'm going to wrap, let's call this the input container, as this container is gonna wrap an input element. So here is my input element. And as all inputs, it's gonna have a value. At the moment, I'm just gonna leave it like so. Let's also have a placeholder for it. Maybe let's have something like when is Christmas? Okay, very simple question. We'll have an onChange, which will essentially change the value for us and save it in the state of this app. But for now, I'm just gonna keep it empty. Of course, we haven't written that function yet. Cool. I'm also going to do something, and I'm going to have a button here. It's going to say ask me, and then another button. So we're going to have two buttons, but we're going to show them conditionally. So ask me or clear. So at the moment, you can see both buttons, but I want to be able to only show the ask me button if there's no error, then show this button. So if this is true, show this element. However, if there is an error, then we show this button, which means we need to save that error, and I'm going to save it to state. So we might as well just go ahead and import use state from React. We're not going to be using use effect, so let's get rid of that. And now I can set the error. So that is the syntax for saving state to the app. Okay, at the moment there is no error. We can actually just keep this as null for now. Or in fact, this is going to be a string, so I'm going to just save it as that. At the moment, this has been assigned to the value of error, and if we want to change it, we use set error. So if there is an error, at the moment there isn't, we should see this because there is no error, right? So let's have a look, and the ask me button is showing. However, if I change this to something when is wrong and save it, then it will say clear because an error does exist. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So we have those two buttons, and now outside of this div, let's also show the error if one exists. So if an error does exist, I'm going to show this P element that shows the error. Otherwise, if it doesn't exist, this won't show at all. Cool. Now we're also going to have a div, and this is actually going to show the search results. So, you know, whatever comes back from the API, but of course there's going to be multiple. It's going to be a history, so there's going to be multiple chats. So class name search result, I will call it. And here we're going to essentially map items onto something. It's going to be a div, and this div is going to hold a P element. That is just going to be the answer. So let's go ahead and give this the class name of answer. Okay, and this div will have a key because when you map onto things, you need a key. So I'm just going to leave that blank for now. Great. And that really is it. Okay, hopefully that was painless. Of course, it doesn't look very nice for now. The magic of styling will literally transform this. So let's go ahead and do it. I'm just going to go ahead and get my index.cs file. So let's get into the source. Let's get our index.css file. And now all I'm going to do is going to say that all the fonts, so font family, is going to be sans serif. No backup, okay? It's just sans serif. Being really basic here, really kind of streamlining this project. Margin 0. Padding is going to be 0. Let's make the whole width of this 100 of the viewport width. The height of this 100 of the viewport height. And then the background color is just going to be like this off-white that I picked out earlier. And then the text color, again, it's not going to be black. It's just going to be a gray. So that's the shorthand for writing 7, 7, 7, 7, 6 sevens. Display flex. We're going to initialize flex box just so we can make sure that everything is in the center from right to left. Great. All P elements in here are, again, I'm just going to change the font weight to be 200, and I'm going to change the font size as well. So I want the font size of all the elements, the P elements, to be exactly 14 pixels. Now the app itself, so the element with the class name of app, so this one right here, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that its width is smaller. Okay, 80 viewport width. And I'm actually going to give it a margin of 10 viewport width again to make up to that 100. And the height is going to be 80 viewport height. Okay, great. And that's going to contain everything in it. I think, what shall we do? Let's have the search section. So that is the first element in there. I'm just going to make sure that it's 100% of the element with the class name of app. The height of it is, again, going to be 100%. Let's use display flex and direction column to make sure everything goes from top to bottom. And that's really it. Okay, so that section essentially is the same as the app. So perhaps we can even go ahead and just give this the class name of app and just make this a div. So I'm just going to delete that for now. Okay, we're really streamlining things here. So there we go. And this just means that I can, let's go ahead and add this like that and get rid of the search section completely. Great. Now let's go ahead and get these search results. So the search results is here. It lives inside the app. Let's maybe format this a little bit better. So I'm just going to use WebStorm to code, reformat code, and that is much better. So the search result, singular, make sure that is singular. I'm going to do margin top to space it out from the element above, 10 pixels, and I'm going to do overflow scroll. So we can scroll through all the results, and we don't have to scroll the actual page. Okay, great. Now let's pick out the little things. So I'm going to pick out this button by the class name of surprise. So .surprise. Let's give it a background color. I'm going to go ahead and use another color that I have pre-picked out, ECECF1. I'm also going to change the color of the text to be black. And then let's add a border radius of 5 pixels to round it off. This should be that. And let's also add a font weight to this text. Let's go ahead with 600. And the padding, 4 pixels on the top and bottom and 12 pixels on the left and right. The margin of this, again, this I'm going 0 at the top, 0 on the right, 2 pixels on the bottom, and 5 pixels on the left. And the border of this is going to be none. Okay, so if you're interested in how this is looking so far, here we go. This is looking good. Let's carry on. So now I'm going to style the input container. So I'm going to find the element with the class name of input container. The width of this is going to be 100%. And now I'm going to add a border to this. It's going to be a solid border, 0.5 pixels in width. And again, CA is the color I have picked out for it. The box sizing of this is going to be border box, so that the border is actually on the inside. And let's round it off, so border radius, maybe let's make it 6 pixels this time. And the box shadow I'm going to give it is going to be RGBA for transparency, 0, 0, 82 with 0.15 opacity, okay? And once again, we're going to do a blur, a spread, and great. Now, inside the input container, I want to grab the input that lives in it. I'm just going to get rid of the border. The padding for this, let's go ahead with 13 pixels on the top and bottom, and 14 pixels on the left and right. Once again, box sizing, I'm going to go with border box. The font size, I'm going to go with 15 pixels. Outline, none. This will just get rid of the blue outline when you interact with the input. And the width of this is going to be 90% of the parent, with a font weight of this being 200. Okay, so now the input looks like this. I'm going to use display flex on this input container so that each item is kind of next to each other rather than stacked. And there we go. Let's do the button next. So in fact, maybe let's also work on the placeholder text. So I can do this by grabbing the input that lives inside the input holder. And then if I want to get the placeholder text, I can change it like so. Yeah, let's go with this color, and let's just make this a little bit like that. So there we go, much better in my opinion. Okay, now let's do the button that lives inside the input container. So any button that lives inside the input container is going to have this styling. I'm going to give it a min width of 10%. Border, of course, is going to be none. And let's also just add a border on the left side, okay, to differentiate from the input. Let's give it 1 pixel solid. And yeah, I'm happy with that gray. Let's also make sure the background color is white and the text color is going to be this one that I used before. The font weight, I'm going to go with bold, and cursor, I'm going to add a cursor that is a pointer just for fun. Okay, just make sure that that is like that, and let's see what it looks like. So I love this so much. Let's move on. I think maybe let's add overflow hidden to the input. So once again, let's go maybe to the input container this time. I'm just going to go with overflow hidden, just so that this is a bit more rounded off at the edges. Wonderful. Okay, that's nearly finished. So I'm also going to add some styling to any button that lives inside the input container. And if it's active, so this is how you grab an active button that lives inside the input container, make sure that space is there. I'm going to just change the background color to be CA. So kind of grayed out when it's active. And finally, let's also style anything with the class of answer. And for us, that is these P elements. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a padding to each one of 13 pixels at the top and bottom, 14 pixels on the left and right. Let's also add a border of solid 0.5 pixels, CA. Okay, so kind of similar styling repeating. I'm also going to give them a background color. Let's make it white. So #FFF, a margin of 5 pixels, a font size of 15 pixels, a font weight of 200, and a border radius of 6. So wonderful. I'm really happy with how this is looking so far. Okay, let's work on linking up the surprise me button first. So let's get rid of this for now. And up here, I essentially want to get a random value to work with. So we've saved errors. Another thing I want to save is the value, and the value is simply going to be the text that we are writing in here. But we also want to generate some randomly. So this is super simple to do. All I'm going to do is define our surprise options like so, and it is going to be an array. So that is good for us to use. And now I'm just going to put in some random options. So who won the latest Nobel Peace Prize can be one question. We can also have, where does pizza come from? That's a great question. And how do you make a BLT sandwich? I'm clearly very hungry because these are all very food focused pretty much, apart from the first one. So once we have our surprise options, I'm just going to write a super simple function, const surprise, and all it's going to do is get a random value from this array. So in order to get a random value, yes, thank you, tab 9. We get the surprise options, we open up the array, we then get math floor, which will round down to the nearest integer, and we simply get the surprise options length and multiply it by math random. And math random will return back a number from 0 to just under 1. So if you multiply it by the length, it will always be just under 3, and we round it down so it could be either 0, 1, or 2. And if we pass through 0 into the array, we'll get back this. If we pass through 1, we'll get this. And if we pass through 2, we will get that. So that is how we get a random value. And then I'm going to get random value, and I'm going to pass it through to set value. So we're essentially at the beginning setting value to be this. However, if we call this function, we will get a random value from here and reset this value using set value to be one of these 3. So now where should we do this? Well, I think if we press the surprise button, right? So on click of this, I just want to call that function. Okay, wonderful. So maybe we should also add an option to disable this. And I think this should be disabled if a chat history already exists, right? So maybe let's set const chat history, set chat history. And this will be an empty array. So now if chat history exists, we want this to be disabled. But for now, of course, it's not. And the other thing we want to pass through here is the value. So you can actually see it in the input. So on change, we also need to set value of this. I'm going to pass through the e target value of whatever we type into the input itself. Of course, we need to make this a function like so and pass through e. So now this value, so this value here can be changed in 2 ways, right? Either if we click here on surprise me, or if we start typing in here. So let's try it out. Maybe as chat history, is an empty array up here, we should probably change it to something if no chat history exists, then we can do it. There we go. So this is looking good. We're getting a random value each time, or we can type in our own question like so, and that will be saved to the value here. So we can send it over to our API. So let's do it. So let's go ahead and write a function here. I'm going to call it get response, as that is essentially what we want to do. We were going to get a response from the API. Just make sure to spell response correctly. This is going to be an async function, so let's just go ahead and whack that in here. First off, however, if no value exists and we essentially click on the ask me button, right? So if you click on here and no value exists, we want an error to show up essentially. So I'm going to set an error, and it's just going to say error, please ask a question. Okay, and we can of course show that too. So maybe let's go ahead and put that here. We already have, so that will show up if there is an error. And we're just going to return out of this. Great. Now we're going to try something. So try and catch. We're going to use the try and catch blocks. I'm going to try something, and if it doesn't work, we're just going to catch any error. I'm going to console error the error, and we're also going to set the error. So we're not going to use what comes back to us. I'm just writing a super basic error that doesn't really give us much insight into what went wrong. But if you want to take this a step further, please do. You can use this error to write some custom error messages. Cool. So that's what we're going to do. And now what are we going to send over to the backend? Well, I think we're going to space this out a bit. We're going to define our options first. Okay, and this is going to be a post method. We are also going to be sending over the whole chat history. So I'm going to use JSON stringify. I'm going to create an object, and in that object, we're going to send over all the chat history okay? And we're also going to send over a message, which is the latest text that we want to send through. So essentially we're sending over whatever we type in here, and if there is a chat history of previous questions, we're going to send that over as well. Great. Let's also set our headers. So we're going to choose content type JSON for that. That is correct. And now as the response, we're going to await, fetch, and we can set our own endpoint. So let's say that we want our backend to be on port 8000, and I'm just going to make the endpoint Gemini, and we're going to send through all these options with it. So that is our response, and of course, once that comes back to us, we're going to get text from it like so, and save this as something. We're going to await it though, as it isn't asynchronous method, so we need to await that, and then let's save it as data, and I'm just going to console log the data for now so we can see what's coming back. Great. So now let's actually work on our backend. So in here, like I said, we're going to define the port. I did say this would be port 8000, so that's all I have done. We are going to have to import a few packages or dependencies to help us here. So let's just go ahead and open up a new tab, making sure you're still in React Gemini app. And I'm going to install Express, which is going to help us with the routing. Chorus, which is going to help us get rid of those pesky blocks by calls messages when you're sending stuff from the front end to the back end and so on. We're also going to use the .env package to store secrets in our env file, as you just saw. And we are also going to need Google Generative AI. So let's go ahead and import that too. So great. That is the packages that we're going to need for this project. So let's just wait for that to do its thing, and let's continue. So of course we're going to need Express, require Express, and we're going to wait for all of this wonderfulness from the package to come back, and we're going to save it as Express, and once we have it, we're going to release it. So this will essentially release methods and properties that come with Express, and if we save it under a const, so for example app, we can now use app to get any method, so for example the use method from it. So great, we're going to do that. We're also going to require cause, so const cause require cause. Again, this is to get past those pesky blocked by cause messages when sending stuff from the front end to the back end and so on. And we're also going to also pass JSON from the front end, so hence we need to use Express JSON here. Great. So let's just minimize that for now. We also are going to require, and we did import the .env package, so that we can essentially work with secrets like our Google API key. Cool. The other thing we're going to do is get Google Generative AI from require, and then the package at Google Generative AI. Okay, so there we go. We've got everything nearly set up. The other thing we're actually going to do is get that API key that we stored in our backend. So I'm going to use Google Generative AI, and I'm just going to pass it through that API key. Okay, I'm going to pass it through here. So we can just go process env, and then whatever we called our API key in our .env file, which was Google Gen AI key. So I'm just going to paste it in like so. Okay, wonderful. Let's move on. I'm also just going to listen out to check that everything is working as it should, passing through the port as the first parameter, and as the second parameter is a callback function, I'm just going to do console log listening on port and then our port number. Cool. So now if we run this, so for example, here in the package JSON, we did write our script to listen out for anything on the server.js file. So now I can do npm run start backend, and it should start our backend listening on port 8000. Everything is working as it should. Cool. So now let's write our route. We wrote a post request to the endpoint Gemini, as you saw here. So now what do we want to send over to this backend, to this endpoint? Well, it's essentially all of this, right? So let's actually do that. And you can send stuff over and you can get it by going to rec body, and then that should bring back this whole body right here. And if you want to get the history from it, I can simply do .history. So maybe let's actually console log this so we can see what is going on. And I'm also going to console log the rec body message, as that is another thing that we are sending over. So let's just see if this works for now. I'm just going to get up here, my backend, so we can see what's being sent. So now if I go ahead and send some text, when is Christmas, for example, and now let's hook up the Ask Me button. So let's actually get this whole get response function and attach it to the Ask Me button. So on click of this, we want to get a response. So let's go ahead and do it, Ask Me. And let's go back in here and look in the server.js file in the terminal. We get two things being consoled out. We get the history, which yes, is an empty array as we set that up here. And we also get the value, which is when is Christmas. So we save the value up here, but then we also said the value should be the message. So great, we are sending stuff over. We're sending over the chat history and the value because we are going into the request body history and into the request body message. So request body history, request body message. We're sending that over. Now let's send it over to Google. So let's go ahead and do it. Okay, all I'm going to do is get Gen AI. Once again, this is just from the documentation that I showed you earlier. We're going to do get generative model, and we're going to pass through the model that we discussed. So let's define the model here. It is the Gemini Pro model. And I'm just going to save this as model. So we've just defined it. This should be Gen AI as we defined here. And now let's define the chat. The chat, well, we're going to get the model and we're going to use the method start chat that comes with it. And we're going to create an object and we're just going to pass through the history, which again, we already have. It's this, so request body history. Cool. And now let's also define the message. So we define our chat, and now the message is just simply going to be request body message. So that's a lot simpler. Okay, so I'm just going to delete that for now as we don't really need it. The next thing we need to do is actually get the result of what comes back. So const result equals, and we're going to await, we're going to get the chat, so what we defined here, and we're going to send a message, and we're going to send through this message to the chat as well. So along with the history, we're sending through the message too, and now we're going to get the result, and we're going to get the response from it. And as this is a asynchronous function, we need to await it. And let's save this as the response, so just like so. And then when we get the response, we need to get its text. Okay, and let's save this as text. So just like that. Okay, and now I'm just going to do res send the text to send it back to our front end. Make sure this says send message. And once we get it back here, well, at the moment, we're just console logging it out. So now all I need to do is essentially map them onto here. We need to save the history. So I'm going to set chat history. However, when working with arrays, we need to essentially set the old state, which I'm going to choose to call old chat history. We need to release it back into the array, and then the data. Well, I'm going to actually create a new object that is in line with the data that already exists. So the way that Google modeled it, so we're going to have a user, and the user essentially asked this question, which is our value. And then we're also going to have another object, and this role is going to be the model, and it's going to be what comes back to us. So this is what the model said, or essentially the AI said, and it's going to be the data that comes back. So the piece of text. Great. And once we have done that, we can set the value to be an empty string again. Wonderful. So now that we have that chat history, I'm just going to scroll down here and we're going to map it onto this. So let's get the chat history and we're going to map it onto this whole div just like so. And what we're going to do is map, let's open up our parentheses once more. And we're going to map each chat item as well as the index. I'm going to pass through the index as the key. It's not really used, hence I use this. And now for each chat item, I'm essentially going to put it in here. I'm going to get the chat item role. So it's either going to be user or model. And then I'm just going to get the chat item parts. And wonderful. I'm really happy with this. And maybe let's format this file once more. The last thing I want to do is just clear the chat history, the value and the error if we want to clear everything. So I'm going to do so on the clear button. So on click of this, I want to clear, right? So let's define this function. Let's just do so here. So const clear. And I'm just going to set the value to be null, set the error to be null, and set the chat history to be an empty array again. Great. And that's it. So let's try it out. I'm just going to type in when is Christmas. And if you hit ask me, it should come back with two messages. That was my message, so when is Christmas, and then whatever the model responded with, which is December 25th. Now, I can go ahead and ask a follow-up question to this conversation, meaning it's taking into context the previous messages. So I can simply write, are you sure? Obviously, are you sure by itself won't mean much, but with the context, we know we're talking about Christmas. So if I type in, are you sure? The model will come back with, yes, I am sure that Christmas is on December 25th. Okay? And then you can continue with other questions. So it will continue the multi-chat conversation. Amazing. So this is working as it should. I love it. Let me know what you think below.